Remember how in my review for My Little Pony Friendship is Magic I said that I was planning on seeing the movie in cinemas? Yeah. I was serious. I regret nothing. My Little Pony the movie was released in 1986 and was directed by Michael Jones. What is this? Future me in editing? Yeah? The poster? What about it? It's the wrong movie. Oh, yeah, I'm so sorry about that. Give me 1 second. There we go. Much better. Thank you. My Little Pony the Movie 2017 edition was directed by Jayson Thiessen. It stars Tara Strong, Ashleigh Ball, Andrea Libman, Tabitha St Germain, and is based off the show My Little Pony Friendship is Magic that was created by Lauren Faust. The film takes place between Season 7 and Season 8 of the show. Twilight Sparkle is putting on a friendship festival, because movie. However, a group of new villains arise, and so the main six have to band together and travel beyond Equestria in an attempt to save it. For anyone that has seen my review of the show, you would know that I am a fan of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, as weird as that sounds. Watching the show, it never really rubs me that the show was made exclusively for kids. I think it's a well-made show, I think it's funny, well-written, has really well-developed characters, it's very morally driven, and overall, I think it's just an entertaining show, and I can definitely see why it's so popular. And overall, I am proud to call myself a Brony. So keep in mind that while I will try to be objective, because I know a lot of my viewers are non-Bronies, so while I will be looking at the film quite critically, I will also be judging the film as a fan of the show. And overall, after walking out of this movie, I really liked it. I thought it was a good, fun, solid, entertaining film, and I thoroughly enjoyed watching it. One thing I liked about this movie is the fact the plot is completely standalone. A lot of these characters that are being introduced to us in the movie we have never seen before, and this is coming from someone who has seen the entire show. And the stuff that happens in Season 7 of the show versus the stuff that happens in this movie, there's pretty much no relationship. The closest we get is when the movie has a few subtle references and jokes of things that happened in the show. But those are just a couple of jokes, and they're not major plot points. But they're just little jokes and references that only fans of the show will get, and they're not major plot points, so anyone that's going into the movie without seeing the show will overall understand the basic plot of this film. So no one watching this movie will probably be as lost as Johnny being trapped in a cornfield. I think there's only going to be like one person watching this that's actually going to get that reference. While there were some Bronies that complained that they kind of feel like that the show should have foreshadowed the events of the film, but overall, I'm glad they made it stand alone. Sure, it would have been nice for Season 7 to sort of hint at this movie, but at the same time, I'm kind of glad it didn't. And I loved how the resolution of the film, no spoilers, this is a spoiler-free review, but I loved how the resolution of the film was not reverted to the elements of harmony or some other deus ex machina. Seriously, in like almost every two-parter of the show, one of the first things that come up is usually the elements of harmony, or just the power of love. In fact, the elements of harmony aren't even mentioned in this movie, like, at all. And while I was a little bit confused as to why they didn't exactly try using the elements of harmony in the movie, but at the same time, I'm really glad that they weren't reverted to something as simple as the elements of harmony, and the actual resolution is a genuine solution. But at the same time, I would have liked at least one line on why they didn't even try to use the elements of harmony, because watching the show, they definitely had the elements of harmony at their disposal at the time this movie takes place in the show. But as much as I enjoyed the film, I did have some issues with it plot-wise. For starters, this movie is extremely formulaic, and it's the kind of plot that we've seen a million times before. The heroes are happy and it's all nice and cheerful, but then villains arise and they have to go on some sort of massive journey, and the journey is going to play out pretty much exactly as you would expect. This is a very, very predictable movie, which is a really heavy contrast to Blade Runner 2049, the last movie I saw in cinemas, which was the exact opposite. I also felt like that the pacing was a little bit wonky in places. The pacing wasn't terrible, and it's definitely not going to bug other people as much as something like Blade Runner 2049 might, but it's definitely noticeable. I wouldn't say the pacing was borderline bad, but there was definitely something that I felt rather off about it. One other thing I liked about this movie though is the fact it stays very true to the original source material. Even though it is a different animation style and we're exploring places that have never been in the show, it still has the exact same vibe and feeling as the show. Everything down to the character models, to some of the more familiar locations, to the way the movie looks and feels, it feels very true to the show. And this includes the characters. When watching this movie, a lot of the characters have their own little introductions, especially the main six, and almost immediately as the characters are introduced to us, I almost immediately thought to myself, this is exactly what they're like in the show. Rainbow Dash is still the one with the obsession of speed, Rarity still loves fashion and decorations, Fluttershy is still very timid, and Pinkie Pie is, well, Pinkie Pie. And overall, it was great seeing these characters on the big screen, and I feel like that most of these characters were really on point. Overall, it was just great seeing them on the big screen, and it was great to see that they were all perfectly in character. Except for one. One thing that really caught me off guard was just how pessimistic Twilight was throughout the entire movie. Now, for the most part, I didn't think she was that bad, and I could definitely see where she was coming from. And there were quite a few things that were happening in the movie that kind of justified why she was acting the way she was behaving, even if it's pretty rare to see her behaving like that in the show. So as a whole, she wasn't that bad. But there was one particular part of the film where I really feel like she crossed the line. Now, trying not to give it away, there's a particular point in the film where she has one very particular line of dialogue, and this line of dialogue felt like a huge step out of character. And the reason why I say that is because even with the context of what was happening in that part of the film, and trying to look at the situation from her point of view, but even when I try to think of it from her perspective, every time I think of that line, I always think that Twilight would never say that, no matter how bad things get. I won't go into any details here for spoiler reasons, but hopefully those who have seen the film will know exactly what line I'm talking about. But apart from that, I thought Twilight was fine. Tara Strong gave an excellent performance as usual, and I also really liked her character arc, and I also liked how her character arc kind of fitted with the character arc that she goes through in the show. Well, at least somewhat. One other thing that really bugged me while I'm on the subject of flaws are the main six. Well, it was great to see them on the big screen. One thing that really bugged me was just the amount of screen time and attention they were each given. And the screen time and attention that the main six is given is incredibly unbalanced. I mean, Rainbow Dash is my favorite character, but my goodness, she and Pinkie Pie had way too much of the spotlight in this movie. Like, these two really heavily contribute to the plot, they have the most jokes, and overall, out of the main six, except for Twilight, since she's the protagonist, Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie are the ones that really take up the spotlight, and they take away from the other members of the main six. And as a result, Applejack, Rarity, and especially Fluttershy were seriously pushed to the sideline in this movie. I only remember a couple of small moments from Applejack and Rarity, and Fluttershy I think only has like 5 lines in the entire movie. She was really pushed to the sideline in this film. Although I will definitely say that Fluttershy is certainly responsible for the funniest scene in the movie. And I kind of wish that each of the main six all got an equal amount of attention. The only one that I think should have gotten a bit more attention than the others is Twilight, since, as I just stated, she's the protagonist. And overall, I just kind of wish that the main six were in the movie a little bit more. One of my favourite aspects of the show are the main six and their camaraderie, their relationship, their banter, the way they bounce off each other. The relationship between these characters is one of the main reasons why I love the show. And I was really hoping to see a lot more of that in this movie. And I think one of the reasons why the main six is so seriously pushed to the sideline in this movie is because the movie is trying to make room to also focus on the new characters. And the new characters didn't really leave that much of an impact either. I mean, I definitely think they were likable, but I don't really know much about them except for some of their most basic quirks, and I barely even remember their names. One thing that I was really afraid of going into the movie is that I was afraid that this movie was going to have way too many characters. And as a result, the characters were all going to be really bogged down because there was just too many to focus on. And while it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, and it's certainly better than other films like Independence Day Resurgence, but overall, yeah, unfortunately, that is what ended up happening. There are way too many characters in this movie. I mean, it felt like the filmmakers were really trying to have trouble deciding whether they wanted the main focus to be on Twilight, the main six, or these new characters. And it kind of feels like that the entire movie is trying to juggle between these three. And the main reason why I say that is because the new characters were quite underwhelming, because anytime we would be able to spend fleshing out these characters more, that is pushed out of the way to find some time and room to focus on the main six. But when we're trying to focus on the main six, anytime we might have to see the main six shine a little bit more, that is too pushed out of the way to focus on the new characters. And as a result, since the screen time each keep on having to be sacrificed for one or the other, both the new characters and the main six all felt quite shallow. On one hand, I kind of want to see and learn more about the new characters since I felt like they were quite underdeveloped, but at the same time, I also really wish the main six were in the movie more. And it almost feels like that the only way you could really do that with the amount of characters you have is just simply by extending the running time, which I don't think would have worked as a kids movie. I will say that I was very easily and very quickly able to latch onto the main six in this movie, but I think the only reason why I was able to latch onto the main six so easily is because I already know these characters because I saw the show. But if I saw this movie completely blind and I hadn't seen a single episode of MLP, then no, I really wouldn't care for the main six because I wouldn't know much about them either. However, if there were any new characters that had any impact on me, it was definitely the villains. Well, at least one of them. Tempest, played by Emily Blunt. I loved Tempest. And honestly, aside from Sia, Emily Blunt is the only celebrity in this movie that I actually recognized. But yes, not only was Emily Blunt's performance great, but I overall just thought Tempest was a really great character. I overall loved Tempest because I loved her design, I thought she was a badass, and she has a pretty decent backstory and motivation. It was definitely simple, but I was glad to know that there was at least one there. She also has one of the best songs in the movie. I loved her scar, I loved her broken horn, I thought that was a really cool idea, and she had a really threatening presence, and overall, I just really liked this character as a villain. Granted, I knew exactly where they were taking her character, and I saw the way they were taking it a mile away, but even that I still thought was well executed. While I really liked Tempest as a villain, one thing I do have to point out about the villains is that they appear very, very abruptly. I mean, what you're about to see is barely an exaggeration of what happens in the actual movie. This friendship festival is going to be amazing! What could possibly go wrong? Boo! Ah! That's barely an exaggeration. They appear that abruptly in the film. They come out of nowhere! As abruptly as they appear though, I still really loved Tempest as a villain, and she might be one of, if not my favourite villain in MLP. However, I can definitely not say the same for the bigger villain in the movie, the Storm King. I don't think I know anyone who likes this character as a villain. The Storm King has probably got to be one of the most one-dimensional villains I have ever seen. And that's saying a lot because I've seen a lot of really one-dimensional villains. He has absolutely no motivation. He was just evil for the sake of being evil, and I didn't even really know what he was trying to do. I mean, was he trying to take over Equestria? Did he want to enslave the citizens of Equestria? Did he want Alicorn magic? What the hell did he want? Not only that, but he also wasn't threatening in the slightest. One of the reasons why he's so shallow is because he's barely in the movie. You keep hearing about him and he makes non-physical communications with characters like Tempest throughout the film, almost as if they're trying to build him up. And since he doesn't appear until the very end, then that means that should have been a really good build-up, and that could have been a really great payoff, and he could have been extremely threatening and intimidating. Because when it comes to villains like King Sombra from the Season 3 pilot, as one-dimensional as he is, at least he had a threatening presence, but the Storm King didn't even have that, because when he finally appears, they decided to go down the comedic route. Now, I have no problem with comedic villains, if they're done correctly, and the villains are being comedic throughout the first 2 acts of the movie. And while I definitely found the Storm King funny, the climax of the movie is not the time for the villain to make us laugh. He should be trying to scare us, or at the very least intimidate us. Like, I should be afraid for the main character's survival, but I felt absolutely nothing about this guy. I didn't find him intimidating, I didn't get his motivation, and he was just one of the weakest villains I have ever seen. Okay, so this movie has one great villain and one really terrible villain. Balanced, I guess? There isn't even a really super cool action fight scene between Twilight and the Storm King. Like, there is definitely a final battle, but I was really hoping for an action scene a bit like the fight that Twilight has with T-Rex in the season 4 finale. How awesome would it have been to see something like this on the big screen? Another thing I'd like to talk about are much smaller characters. Background characters. Now, I've been in the Brony fandom for a couple of months now, and I've come to realize that there are a bunch of background ponies that have become extremely popular, the most notable of which being Derpy, which I went into in my review for the show. So one thing that I was really curious about going into the movie is just how many of these characters were going to make cameos. And Bronies will be pleased to hear that there are a lot of cameos in the movie, especially in the very beginning. Oddly enough, there were a few background ponies I definitely noticed didn't make a cameo, like I didn't see Dr. Hooves anywhere. I don't recall seeing other background ponies like Octavia Melody either, but there were some cameos I did recognize like Lyra, Bon Bon, and of course, Derpy. In fact, wouldn't it be cool if Derpy made a cameo in this video? I didn't mean you had to break a hole in my ceiling to do it!
My bad!
Moving on from characters, one thing I would like to talk a little bit about is the animation. The animation is fantastic. This is a beautiful looking movie. The animation of this movie was done by a hybrid of three things: Toon Boom, CGI, and traditionally hand-drawn animation. And I was like, yes! I mean, we now finally have a movie being released in theaters of a traditionally hand-drawn animated feature. Seriously, we haven't gotten a traditionally hand-drawn animated film released in theaters since Princess and the Frog in 2009. Now, no, the entire movie isn't just traditionally hand-drawn animation. There is definitely CG put into the mix, like the background animations and some of the sprites and that sort of thing. But it's great to finally see a 2D animated film released in theaters, and since I really missed 2D animation, that was a huge contributing factor that went into me deciding to finally go and see the movie in cinemas. I wanted to support this movie for the animation alone, and it did not disappoint. The film is very bright and very colourful, and overall it's just extremely pleasing to the eyes. I love the style, it's very unique and different, and I've never seen anything like it. Plus, I just miss 2D animation. I also found like that stuff like the character models blended into the CG backgrounds very well. Overall, this is a beautiful movie. If I had to nitpick though, while there aren't a lot of them, there were a few moments in the movie where the CG was really noticeable. The CGI is blended in and handled a lot better in the final cut of the movie than it is in the trailers, but still. There were definitely times like that airship in the beginning of the movie where I was definitely thinking to myself watching the movie in the theater, yeah, that's definitely CGI. And on the few occasions when I did recognize that that was definitely CGI and it was so obvious to me, it did take me out of the movie for a few seconds. It's not a huge deal and it only popped up every once in a while, and it's just a minor nitpick. And at the same time, I think the only reason why I noticed the CG so easily is essentially because I've trained myself to spot CGI in movies. These days I can usually tell what's CGI and what's not, and so since I've pretty much trained myself to spot these things, it was just noticeable to me. So while I have trained myself to spot CGI, I definitely don't think the casual moviegoer is going to recognize that kind of thing. Because I haven't heard anyone else complain about the CGI standing out, but there were definitely times when it stuck out like a sore thumb. But I think that's just me. And then there's the soundtrack, because this movie is indeed a musical. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the musical genre, just someone automatically breaking into song very abruptly is just a concept I'm never able to take seriously. But that's more of an issue I have with the genre in general and not the film itself, so I'm not going to fault the movie for that. What's important if the songs themselves are actually good, and a handful of them are. I do have to admit the songs aren't really that bad, and they're at least on par with the kind of stuff you hear in the show. There are definitely a few tracks in the movie I enjoyed. The songs are definitely quite catchy, and it's definitely something you would expect to hear in MLP. And while I definitely remember some of the songs, none of them have really gotten stuck into my head. Those songs like We've Got This Together and Time to Be Awesome have been pretty close, but not quite. But the music is still pretty decent. Basically, if you like the music from the show, you're probably going to like the music in the movie. So it may sound like that this movie is a bit of a mixed bag, but it really isn't. Overall, while I definitely did have a lot of things to nitpick about this movie, that's really all a lot of these are. Nitpicks. A lot of these are just little minor gripes that I personally have and the kind of things that I would like to see change if this movie was able to improve. But overall, I still really thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I'm glad I saw it in cinemas, and the things I liked about the movie definitely outweigh the negative. I had a lot of fun with this movie, and I'm definitely glad I saw it in cinemas. But I would not recommend it to newcomers. The movie plays it very safe, and while it definitely does have a standalone plot, the movie still kind of assumes you've already seen at least some of the show, so if you haven't seen any of the show, you're still going to be a little bit lost. So if you're a newcomer or an outsider and you're curious to see why the show is so successful, your best bet is really to just start with the show and watch this movie later. So it does have a bit of missed potential in that regard. However, for fans of the show, I really liked it. It's not perfect and I definitely had issues with it, but overall I still would say that I wasn't disappointed. They're just little minor nitpicks I have with it. So if you miss 2D animation or you're a fan of the show and you haven't seen this movie already for some reason, then I absolutely recommend this movie for you. But if you haven't, I recommend you just start with the show. And if you don't like My Little Pony at all, then this movie's definitely not going to change your mind. But I personally had a lot of fun with it, and I'm glad I saw it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again. I'm going to give My Little Pony the movie a B. Well, thank you all for watching. Stay tuned till my next video. But until then, I really have to do something about that ceiling.
Anything I can do to help?
No! Yippee-ki-yay, movie lovers!